Today we're talking about creatine for both strength and endurance athletes. So traditionally, creatine's been kind of thought of as the go-to supplement for strength athletes, so weightlifters, powerlifters, stuff like that. It's pretty closely tied with strength. So for a long time, it was thought of in that box, but somewhat recently, there's been a huge body of research coming out about it for being possibly beneficial for endurance athletes. So we'll get into some of that today, but we'll start with just what is creatine. So if you follow me on social media, I shared about this and I got like multiple people that texted me weird questions, like joking about creatine and like what it is. So I hopefully can clear up some of this. Creatine is a naturally occurring substance in vertebrates. So it's stored in skeletal muscle. Primarily, like 95% of our stores are in skeletal muscle, but then the other 5% are kind of distributed amongst our brain, kidneys, and liver. Since it is found in muscle, as you might suspect, we do absorb some, get some when we eat meat. So as we get into this, some of the research has looked at it in like vegetarians and non-meat eaters, and they typically have an even bigger benefit and effect from taking creatine. But with that being said, there's still pretty big benefit for meat eaters when you start supplementing with creatine. So what does it do? So we know that it's found in skeletal muscle. We know that we naturally have it, but what does it do? So ATP is the most basic form of energy in our cells. So our cells run on ATP when we eat food. It's broken down into really small subunits that get turned into ATP for our cells to run. So typically during exercise, really high intensity exercise, this is a limiting factor and it runs out pretty quickly when we're working really hard. So creatine helps us to replenish that ATP in our muscle. So as you might suspect, if we increase our creatine stores and the amount of creatine that we have in our bodies, we might be able to replenish and regenerate that ATP faster, which allows us to work harder or work at a higher rate for a little bit longer. And the most effective supplemental form of creatine is creatine monohydrate. I don't know that I've honestly, from any reputable source, like any reputable brand, seen a different form. But just a heads up, that is the most common form. It is one of the most researched ergogenic aids on the market, and it has one of the highest safety profiles. So there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of studies about creatine. And now it's started to seep out into other areas of research. So for like helping treat medical conditions and stuff. But like 70% of those have found it to be effective. 30% found that it wasn't so effective, and then no studies have found it to be dangerous or cause harm, which you might suspect, again, since it's naturally occurring in our bodies, there's no reason that taking some more of it should cause an issue. So what can it do for athletes? So we kind of know what it is and what it does, but what does supplementing with it do for athletes? So research suggests that supplementing with creatine can increase strength, power, help improve and increase muscle mass, and it can even aid in recovery. So with some of this increase in strength and power, we see an improvement in sprint performance when someone is supplementing with creatine. We also see an increase in work capacity. So the ability to do high level work is improved. Again, thinking back to creatine's function of providing like help replenish the cell's energy stores, that makes sense that, you know, if we can create more energy for ourselves, replenish that faster, that we can work at a higher level for a little bit longer. So there's some other research that even suggests that creatine can help us with training adaptations. So the training process is typically stressing your body and then backing off to let you adjust to that. So that's that adaptation. So there's research that supplementing with creatine can aid that training adaptation, which can in turn improve our training tolerance and allow us to get more out of that training than we might otherwise. So as we talked about, creatine's traditionally been used in strength athletes because of those increases in strength, power, muscle mass, all of those things. But again, there's been research much more recently, it's come to be of interest for endurance athletes for many of those same reasons. So for endurance athletes, it can aid in that repeated sprint performance. So many endurance athletes, especially if you're in a race at a high level, there are mid-race sprints, there are accelerations. You think of running races, especially top-level runners. You think of triathletes, you think of cyclists. All of those have mid-race sprints that can occur. So supplementing with creatine and improving those your performance in those sprints could be hugely beneficial and have an impact on the race itself. But even outside of just race performance, with training, most endurance athletes on a structured training plan will do intervals of some sort. Or even if you're not on a structured training plan, you think of like with running fartleks, those intervals like that, creatine can help improve the sprint performance. And again, like we talked about on that last slide, improving, especially in training, improving that sprint performance can in turn lead to improved training benefits overall, like getting more out of your training. But this is also, this could be beneficial for endurance athletes in the off season, when you're doing weight training, cross training, stuff like that. Improving the amount of muscle mass and the quality of that muscle mass is hugely helpful for endurance athletes. And so supplementing with creatine can help get the most out of that off-season training as well, not just those interval sessions and stuff. There's other research that supplementing with creatine, so like loading up on the creatine before we do carb loading, can actually enhance glycogen synthesis and allow us to store even more glycogen than we potentially could otherwise. So you think about like extended endurance events, you think of marathons, Ironman, half Ironman triathlons, long bike races, stuff like that. That's huge. That just means that you have more time until you bonk. So really beneficial there. There's other research that creatine can help enhance recovery. That's become like a huge point of interest for a lot of people lately, about like revolving around really just high level training of any sort. Overtraining has become much more of a concern for a lot of people. And so if we can help enhance that recovery, we can help ward off overtraining and again, make sure that we're getting the most out of our training possible and heading into the next session or the next race fresh. Kind of like we talked about, if we're recovering, we can increase our training tolerance, potentially allowing us to train at a higher level and get more out of our training. But again, some of those same concepts that apply to strength athletes can apply to those endurance athletes. So if we can build more lean mass that has favorable impacts on body composition. So most endurance athletes have a big focus on weight and then body composition, because when you're having to move your body through space for a long time or at a high speed, we don't want to be carrying a lot of extra weight. So creatine is right up that alley of improving muscle mass and again, then allowing for high quality muscle that can generate a lot of strength and power. So super beneficial potentially for endurance athletes. So like we talked about in that last slide, talked about loading up on creatine. So in the past, there was the loading protocol was used for dosing creatine. The idea was that you just wanted to increase your creatine stores as quickly as possible. We've kind of since found that not totally necessary to do that. For simplicity's sake, you can just take 5 to 10 grams per day and just keep doing it. And it takes you, I think it's a few weeks up to a month to kind of saturate those creatine stores. So if you're not in a hurry to kind of spike your creatine stores, you can just take 5 to 10 grams a day and just keep doing it. But if you do, maybe you've got an event coming up and you're like, hey, this is the supplement for me. I'm sold. Michael sold me on it. He gave me all this great info. And you want to increase your stores quickly. You want to basically take 5 times that amount, so 25 grams per day. You can do the math to really tailor it to your body size. So that would be 0.3 grams per kilogram per day. And you really want to split that into 5 even doses throughout each day. And you do that for a whole week. And then you kind of back down to that 5 to 10 gram maintenance dose. So you can do the math on that and kind of work it out. But those are the numbers, the general numbers for most people. And then from there, there's I get questions about needing to cycle on and off. So again, back in like probably the early 2000s, people said that, yeah, you can take creatine, but you need to cycle off of it, and you can cycle on and off. There's not really any research to recommend that. Research actually shows that you really don't need to cycle off of it. You can if you want, but there's no need to. You can just keep taking it continuously, and all it does is keep your stores in your body saturated. So if you cycle off of creatine, once your levels drop back, you will have to reload and like resaturate your stores. So just something to keep in mind if you do take creatine. So side effects. So side effects are pretty minimal. We talked about it has one of the best safety profiles of any supplement. So the biggest side effect that you always hear about is water retention. So as a result, that can cause weight gain. If you have like a huge amount of water retention, that can cause some stomach and GI distress. So think like gassiness, diarrhea, stuff like that, and muscle cramps. But most of those things are seen when you're not properly hydrated. And in fact, this is again kind of going back to endurance athletes, really in particular, this is kind of tailored for them. If you're properly hydrating while taking creatine, research actually suggests that because of the ability for creatine to retain some water, we actually have better hydration of muscle if you're, again, hydrating properly. So potentially a huge benefit there when we think of dehydration. And here at the Endurance Edge, that's one of the biggest things that we help endurance athletes with outside of nutrition and coaching, is the sweat testing that we do is huge. We see so many people come in having issues with cramps, like chronic issues with cramps in races, training, like here in North Carolina, it's hot and humid. And so people are often cramping. So again, if we can improve hydration, we can help delay cramps, help make it easier to keep cramps away. So another huge benefit potentially that comes out of one of the side effects. But everything has its pros and cons. So if you are super worried about that number on the scale, like if you are in like wrestling potentially is maybe not a good sport, even though like all the benefits line up with being helpful with like wrestling, because of the weight aspect there, not having 100% control over that when you're taking creatine is maybe a detriment. But again, I kind of have this conversation with a lot of athletes, especially in endurance sports, because like we talked about, a lot of people in endurance sports are really focused on weight, but it's more about body composition. So if your weight's a little bit higher, but you have a lot more muscle, you can generate a lot more power. And so that's a much bigger benefit to performance than that couple of pounds might be. Any questions? I'll stop sharing and go back over and see if we have any. So I got one question about upcoming bike race on this coming Saturday, so just a couple of days. So likely not enough time to reap any benefits due to how close we are in proximity to the event. Yeah, that's unfortunately pretty true. I mean, you could start taking it, but you're likely not going to see any benefit in just a day or two. But with that being said, like we talked about, there's really not a drawback. So as long as you're staying hydrated, then over the next couple of days while you're loading the creatine and everything, you could do, like we talked about, that loading protocol of a much higher dose for a week. And it certainly wouldn't hurt, but you could always hold off until after this event that you've got, and then look at starting it for maybe that next event, and just after this event getting loaded up, and then keeping those stores sustained as we head into that next event you got. Let's see. Any other questions? That is a great question. So I was asked, does creatine have any impact on bone density? So I don't know. That's a great question. I'll look into that and I'll let you know. I would suspect I'm going to make an educated response. and then I'll double check that and I'll let you know. But I would suspect that it actually helps improve bone density because it does help improve muscle mass and increases in muscle mass, especially like in you think of like endurance athletes that are doing running and like triathlon and stuff. Some of that high impact stuff actually helps improve bone density and then increases in muscle mass. You look at like strength athletes and stuff tend to have pretty good bone density because the increase in muscle places extra stress on the bone to support it. And so the body lays down extra bone and extra network there to help support the increased muscle mass. But that is a great question. So let me write that down actually. And I will double check that. And Jim, I will send you an email. Any other questions? So Jim asked if there are any brands better or worse than any other. Not really. My same thing with pretty much any supplement is make sure you're getting it from a reputable brand and one that's like third-party verified. So NSF certified, or GMP certified. So there are third-party agencies that come in and like make sure that what they claim is in the supplement is actually in the supplement, and then they also make sure that there's nothing in the supplement that shouldn't be in the supplement. So you hear about tainted supplements and stuff. That comes in when they aren't third-party verified. So those third-party agencies do certify them as NSF certified or GMP certified. Make sure that it is truly just what it says is in there. So there's plenty of great brands. Like Now Sports makes a good one. You can get like a giant tub of it that will last you like a whole year for pretty cheap. That's the other thing about creatine is as far as supplements go, it's fairly cheap. But I would say as long as it meets kind of the safety requirement, then it's good to go. And like I talked about in the presentation, the creatine monohydrate is just the best form. But again, if you're getting it from one of those reputable brands, I suspect that's just going to be the form it's in. Like I said, I've never personally seen another form of it. So that's just so things to look for. Reputable, so like NSF certified, GMP certified, and then creatine monohydrate. Any other questions? And it's cool. It's like I talked about earlier, like it's been increasingly popular in research for like other areas, not just athletics. So not just as like a aid in performance, but like other things. Like I know even within the cancer realm, they've started researching it potentially to help because with cancer, like loss of muscle mass is a pretty big issue, and like wasting. So I know that there's been some research there to kind of help maintain and improve muscle mass to kind of help outcomes in like cancer patients or like even potentially eating disorders where you have wasting. So pretty interesting stuff. It's just kind of, like I said, everywhere there's thousands of studies on creatine alone. Any other questions? I'll give you guys just like another minute in case anybody's typing, and then we'll wrap up for today. But the big takeaway is really there's not any detriment to taking it. It's safe. You don't have to worry about interfering with anything. Potentially hugely beneficial even for endurance athletes. If you are an endurance athlete thinking about taking creatine and you decide to start, let us know. Even if you're not one of our regular clients, I'd be super curious to see how you like it, what you think of it. If you are thinking about taking it and you just aren't sure if it like aligns with your goals, what you want to do, feel free to shoot me a message. You can shoot me an email. My email is Michael, Michael, @theenduranceedge.com. You can also set up a free discovery session through our website, theenduranceedge.com. You can set up a discovery session there. We can kind of talk about your goals, about creatine, if that aligns, if that's something you're interested in. If there's anything else you guys want to hear about, definitely let us know so that we can make sure that we're telling you what you guys want to hear about. Thanks for joining me.